This video is brought to you by Mischief. Hey Wisecrack, somehow even longer haired Jared here, and today we're talking about a movie that bitterly divides the Wisecrack team. We've spent hours going back and forth in our self-isolated Skype calls on whether the film is deep or dumb, Zack Snyder's Watchmen. Those of us on the pro-Watchmen's deep side contend that Zack Snyder playfully twists Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' seminal comic, injecting his own signature style to satirize pop culture and comic book films nowadays. However, those of us that think Watchmen's dumb claim Snyder not only completely missed the point of Moore's graphic novel, but betrays everything Watchmen originally stood for. So, who's right? Well, let's dig in this Wisecrack Edition on Zack Snyder's Watchmen. Deep or dumb? But before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Mischief. If you don't know what Mischief is, it's a company that releases drops every 2 weeks ranging from viral digital experiences to high price items. That means in the past, they've dropped Jesus Shoes, a $1,425 pair of sneakers with holy water in the soles that sold out instantly and were subsequently featured on Late Night with Seth Meyers, a text message bot that generates AI feet pics, and The Office Slack, where they recreated all 201 episodes of The Office inside of Slack, just as if Michael and Dwight were working together in 2020. None of their drops have ever been the same, so you never know what you're gonna get. You may have seen some of these go viral on Reddit or even cable news, so here's how you can get access to their future drops before anyone else. They recently released an app to allow fans to get drops early. Drops can sell out within seconds, so the earlier you can get access, the better chance you'll have to secure a drop. Fans will also be able to access exclusive drops twice a month and see what items have been dropped in the past. So download the Mischief app today by going to mschf.com. That's mschf.com, or search MSCHF in the App Store or on Google Play. And now, back to the show. A quick note before we begin, there are 3 different cuts of Watchmen available. For the purposes of this video, we're going to go with Zack Snyder and analyze his preferred version.
So for me, the director's cut is really the, which has the Hollis's death and other things like that.
Alright, let's get into a quick recap. The film opens in an alternate timeline where the emergence of anonymous heroes has dramatically changed the world as we know it. The US won the Vietnam War, and Richard Nixon is now serving his 3rd term as president in 1985. But Cold War tensions between the Soviets and the US have reached a tipping point, each side on the precipice of firing nuclear warheads. Making things worse, former vigilantes are beginning to mysteriously die. The comedian and early masked hero is found dead, flung from his apartment window. The murder prompts another masked vigilante, Rorschach, to investigate and warn other prominent crime fighters of the impending danger. These include Night Owl, Silk Spectre, Ozymandias, and the Superman himself, Dr. Manhattan. Turns out all these murders were a distraction for Ozymandias' master plan, to kill millions of people and frame Dr. Manhattan. Why, you might ask? Well, to unite the Soviet Union and United States against a common enemy, thus averting nuclear holocaust. Now, before we can determine if Snyder either betrays or skillfully adapts Watchmen, first we need to understand the comic book that serves as its basis. At its core, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen is a deconstruction of superhero comics. Comics prior to Watchmen were made in the Bronze Age, which came directly after and largely mimicked the Silver Age, a time when they were at their height of popularity, yet were stifled by government regulations. During the Silver Age, the comics code censored them so that they had to adhere to strident rules, advocating that good should always triumph over evil and forbidding any sexual perversion or excessive violence. The Bronze Age largely replicated many tropes of the Silver Age, though its comics were darker and more laden with social commentary. However, by the 1980s, comics were beginning to more meaningfully rebel against these restrictions, giving way to Watchmen, which obliterated these rules altogether. Watchmen depicts a world where things aren't black and white. The so-called heroes are morally conflicted and sometimes downright awful. Even the villain's nefarious plot is all in the name of averting nuclear Armageddon. Just take it from Alan Moore. I think with things like Watchmen, if they succeed, it's because they transcend the superhero genre. They take it somewhere it had not previously been. The more hopeless the genre, the better really, because people are going to be more surprised if you do something good with it. Zack Snyder's Watchmen emerged at a similar period to its namesake comic. Superhero films had been dominating the pop culture landscape. X-Men, Spider-Man, and later Iron Man ushered in a resurgence of family-friendly superheroes at the multiplex. These films dominated the box office, in turn leading to darker, more adult superhero stories like The Dark Knight. So the time was seemingly perfect for Snyder to obliterate the family-friendly reputation of superhero films and adapt Watchmen not as a satire of comic books, but of comic book movies. Snyder does so by filling his version of Watchmen with graphic violence. Most superhero films eschew the inherent violence their so-called heroes cause. Batman punches thugs senselessly, Iron Man blasts bad guys with his rays, and yet we never saw any of the carnage these violent acts would naturally cause. Everything is 100% PG-13. But in Watchmen, we see everything. Take for instance the scene where Dan and Laurie are attacked by a gang in an alleyway. In the comic, this scene is just Dan and Laurie punching a few goons. We see a few bloodied faces, a broken arm, but that's it. In Snyder's version, however, this scene is depicted in exacting detail that YouTube will probably flag us for showing uncensored. Sorry. One could argue that all this gore was intentional. Snyder, commenting on the dark nature of the film, said, "What's popular about The Dark Knight is that it's a superhero movie at its core. When Batman puts on his costume, that's badass. Yeah, Batman, go kick some ass." Watchmen is an entirely different experience. It punishes the audience. It says, "Oh, you like the comedian? Oh, he's a rapist, by the way." I wanted people to think it's going to be a standard superhero movie, and then they're confronted by all these ideas. By showcasing this violence, Snyder draws attention to how comic book films refuse to acknowledge the destruction and darkness implicit to the idea of vigilantism, satirizing superhero films just as Moore did to comics before him. So, pretty deep, right? Well, look, there's no denying that Zack Snyder is a gifted filmmaker who can stage an action sequence like no other. But these intricate fights are a significant departure from the graphic novel, which in comparison is fairly light on action. Yes, of course, there are fight scenes scattered throughout the book, but they're always depicted in hyper-realistic fashion. Quick, brutal, and over in less than a page or two or three. Moore here lampoons the typical long-winded, elegantly staged superhero fight by depicting what these fights would actually look like in reality. By contrast, as YouTuber Captain Christian notes, the most vivid depiction of violence comes not from traditional superhero antics, but as a result of Ozymandias' destruction of New York. Moore never wanted to glorify Watchmen's heroes or their antics. When heroes look back on their past, it's a pathetic form of nostalgia. The comic even frequently invokes a perfume called nostalgia to drive the point home. As such, all the present-day fight scenes in the comic deliberately don't match the rose-tinted way the supers view their past heroics. The best example of this is Hollis Mason's death. Moore juxtaposes Mason getting beat to death with the old man flashing back to his glory days, beating up the baddies and saving the day. Yet in the present reality, not a single punch of the elderly Hollis is shown, only his fantasies of youthful violence. However, in Snyder's version of Hollis Mason's death, the elder crime fighter goes out with a bang, landing a series of punches and dying with a kind of macho dignity. The fight scene only reinforces Mason's rose-tinted vision of his past. He really was just as heroic as he thinks he was, which is the antithesis of what Moore was saying in the comic. By giving us a veritable show of badassery, Snyder doesn't so much as subvert the genre, he reinforces it. Whereas the comic was anti-nostalgia, the film is adamantly pro-nostalgia. When Silk Spectre and Night Owl don their capes again, it's a moment of triumph in Snyder's version. There are even hero shots of the two. The comic features Silk Spectre and Night Owl reliving their glory days by having a nerdy discussion about how to accommodate fire victims by moving a steering column. The rescue culminates in them serving coffee to their wards. By contrast, Snyder has Night Owl epically shred a water tower with a Gatling gun, while Silk Spectre does a bona fide superhero landing.
Superhero landing. She gonna do a superhero landing.
Whereas the comic depicts an impotent nerd needing to play with his gadgets to feel like a man, the film cures this impotence with actual badassery. By glorifying these superheroes' actions both in the present and past, Snyder undercuts the moral ambiguity of the original Watchmen, glossing over many of the less desirable traits of the characters. Take Rorschach, a character the anarchist Moore created to make fun of Steve Ditko's Ayn Rand-inspired The Question. Moore portrays Rorschach as a misanthrope who is obsessed with other people He reads The New Frontiersman, a far-right paper that supports the KKK, echoes Reagan-era talking points about welfare queens, calls Silk Spectre a bloated aging whore, and just generally stands for everything that Moore personally detests. Snyder keeps a few of these flourishes,
the first Silk Spectre is a bloated, aging whore,
but keeps mostly to the more appealing nihilistic journal entries. Even the questionable comments Rorschach makes are repurposed in Snyder's version. For instance, in the comics and the movie, Rorschach speculates if Ozymandias could be a homosexual. This was meant to be more of a critique on Rorschach's obsession with so-called deviant sex, but in Snyder's version, Rorschach's belief is taken as fact. Ozymandias is revealed to have a hidden file on his computer labeled boys. Thus, Rorschach's worldview is given more extra legitimacy. Instead of the morally complex weirdo from the comics, Rorschach becomes the voice of reason and the audience surrogate of Snyder's film. So we're stuck in a bit of a stalemate between deep or dumb, which means only one thing. Watchmen may have started out as just a lampoon on the superhero genre, but as Moore wrote the series, it began to become something far deeper. Watchmen started off as a silly-ass superhero story, but what I eventually came to the conclusion of about Watchmen was the most important thing in it was its structure. And I think at the end that Watchmen's structure was what it was about. It was about a certain way of viewing reality. It was about a kind of perception which I think was perhaps not as prominent in 1985 as it is now, and as I think it will be in the near future. It's not a linear perception of things that we do increasingly have in the 21st century. See, Moore wanted to challenge readers' perception. He believed in a post-relativity/Einstein world, time could no longer be considered a linear construct. How we perceive the world was inherently incomplete. Events don't occur linearly but are happening simultaneously. Through the structure of Watchmen, and in particular through Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias, Moore sought to prove this point. Just as Dr. Manhattan views time non-linearly, the comic is structured so that the past, present, and future are constantly blurring together. We tried to make Watchmen structured so that images recur all the way through, linking the present with the past and the future, giving foreshadowings of things that have yet to come, giving echoes of things that have already happened. And later in the comic, Ozymandias watches events unfurl on multiple television screens, mirroring how a person would read the comic itself. Adrian Veidt is watching 6 channels at once, and so, at various points in Watchmen, are the readers. It's multi-channel viewing. By exposing readers to a non-linear comic book, Moore sought to challenge how readers perceive their own reality. Similarly, Snyder uses his version of Watchmen to comment on the same. Except for Snyder, he isn't interested in how time and space shape perceptions of reality. Instead, the filmmaker zeroes in on how pop culture and media have warped people's perceptions. With their comic, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were saying, superheroes are kinda funky, aren't they? We build upon that with a movie that acknowledges that superhero movies have affected pop culture. To prove this point, Snyder fills Watchmen with touchstones from pop culture with one crucial addition: superheroes. By doing so, Snyder literalizes the impact of comic book films on viewers, showing how the emergence of superheroes changes familiar moments in pop culture that we all know and remember. Watchmen almost superimposes its heroes on your world, which then changes how you view your world through its prism. That's the genius of this book. That's what we try and do in the movie. The movie is a challenge, sort of like the book is a challenge, to your icons, your morality, how you perceive pop culture, how you perceive mythology, and for that matter, how you perceive God. Everything in Watchmen is filtered through pop culture, even history itself. When Dr. Manhattan fights in the Vietnam War, Snyder recreates this historical moment through the prism of the most famous Vietnam War movie ever made, Apocalypse Now, using the same music cue from Coppola's film. Later, Snyder uses his soundtrack choices to reference the art film Kuyani Scotzi Life Out of Balance. That non-narrative film juxtaposes beautiful scenes of nature with the chaos of modern life, an apt choice for a man who left Earth because of the mayhem of humanity. Even the war room Richard Nixon and his generals use is modeled after a famous film.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here, this is the war room!
All these examples expose how we perceive and filter the world through media and pop culture. It's not just a meta wink that Hollis Mason has a copy of Moore's Watchmen on his shelf. It's yet another example of how pop culture, a comic book like Watchmen, influence and shapes Snyder's, and by proxy our, perception of the world. This theme culminates with Ozymandias watching dozens of TV screens a la the comic book. But unlike Moore's original intent, Ozymandias watching these screens mirroring how viewers read the comic, Snyder instead uses this moment to play on how reality is warped by pop culture. All the images on the screen reference different films and programs that influenced and shaped Zack Snyder, the filmmaker. There's Road Warrior, Looney Tunes, The Day the Earth Stood Still, Failsafe, and more. So what are we to make of Snyder's Watchmen? Has the filmmaker betrayed everything Alan Moore's comics stood for, glorifying its heroes and compromising the moral ambiguity of Moore's work? Or has Snyder skillfully adapted Watchmen for our pop culture saturated times? Ultimately, it all depends on your perception. If you view Watchmen through the lens of Moore's original intent, then Watchmen's pretty dumb. But if you view the film through Snyder's signature style and vision, then the film could be considered deep. Even after all this, we're still pretty split on the merits of this movie. But for what it's worth, I tend to lean towards the deep side, whereas many of our writers lean towards dumb. But honestly, I can see both sides. So what do you think? Is Watchmen deep or dumb? Has your perception of the film changed at all? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks to all our patrons for supporting the channel and our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll catch you next time, guys. And before you go, don't forget to check out Mischief's new app. Go to mschf.com, click the link in the description, or just search MSCHF in the App Store or on Google Play. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.